When Clint Eastwood walked onto that stage, everyone in the room expected a long speech because the man had been in the industry for 40 years and was about to receive his first Oscar. Critics had dismissed him for decades, and now he finally had a chance to respond to all of them. But Clint stepped up to the microphone and spoke for only 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds shocked 3,000 people in that room, and Hollywood's biggest egos looked down in shame that night because Clint had held up a mirror to them. So what did Clint say in those 30 seconds that moved everyone so deeply? And why is that short speech still held up as the perfect Oscar speech years later? That night, Clint reminded everyone of something they'd forgotten, and Hollywood learned a lesson, the kind of lesson it would never forget. If these kinds of real stories move, you don't forget to subscribe because we'll keep sharing the moments Hollywood didn't see, but we should never forget. And the next story will move you even more. On the night of March 29th, 1993, the 65th Academy Awards were being held at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles, and this was Hollywood's biggest night, the most prestigious, most glamorous, most talked about event of the year. The auditorium was packed with over 3,000 people sitting in tuxedos, in evening gowns, diamonds, and millions of dollars worth of jewelry sparkling under the lights, and the air felt electric with anticipation. Cameras were everywhere because over 1 billion people worldwide were watching this night live. From America to Japan, from England to Brazil, everyone was glued to their screens. That night, a film called Unforgiven had been nominated in 9 categories, and both the director and star of the film was Clint Eastwood. This alone was a major achievement, but for Clint it carried a much deeper meaning. Clint was 62 years old that night and had been working in the industry for 40 years. He'd made dozens of films, earned millions, become a worldwide icon. People recognized him on the street. His posters hung on walls. His films had become classics, but he'd never won an Oscar, not once in 40 years, and this bothered him deep inside. Critics had always dismissed him. They'd said, action star, not a real artist. They'd said, Westerns are dead. Clint is stuck in the past. They'd said, he just waves guns and barely talks. You can't call that acting. Some had gone even further. One critic had written, Eastwood is an embarrassment to cinema, in a major newspaper, and that article was talked about for weeks. Another had said, he has no business directing films. What's he doing behind the camera on national television? The Academy had ignored him too. Year after year, other directors took home awards while Clint sat in the audience watching. Some of them had made half as many films as him, but their shelves were full of Oscars, while Clint had nothing. For 40 years, Clint had heard these words and never responded to any of them. Reporters had tried to provoke him, but he just smiled. Critics had attacked him, but he just kept working, making film after film, quietly without complaining, without making excuses. But Unforgiven changed everything because this was a dark Western, a film that showed the real consequences of violence, told a deep story about aging and regret, forced audiences to question their heroes, made viewers uncomfortable, but also deeply moved them. The film was about a man named William Money, a retired killer whose wife had changed him. He now ran a pig farm, had 2 kids, had left his past behind, but one day an old friend came and convinced him to do one last job. He needed the money, his kids would starve, and William picked up the guns he'd buried years ago. Critics were stunned because this was unlike anything Clint had made before. Roger Ebert called it a masterpiece and gave it 4 stars, writing, Eastwood is redefining cinema. The New York Times wrote, one of the finest Westerns ever made, perhaps the finest. Variety magazine ran a full-page analysis with the headline, Those who underestimated Clint Eastwood made a big mistake, and wrote that the director Hollywood had ignored for years was actually a genius. And now it was Oscar night, sitting in the front rows were Hollywood's biggest names, and they were all watching Clint. Steven Spielberg was taking notes in the seat next to him. He'd been nominated that year for Schindler's List, and everyone thought he would win, but even Spielberg had respect for Clint. Martin Scorsese was watching the stage from behind his glasses. He'd been Oscar-less for years himself and understood exactly how Clint felt. Jack Nicholson was leaning back with that famous grin. He had 3 Oscars and had worked with Clint years ago. He was eagerly awaiting this night. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Meryl Streep, Jodie Foster, Anthony Hopkins were all there. Hollywood royalty gathered together watching Clint, and everyone was asking the same question. Will tonight finally be Clint's night? As the night progressed, Unforgiven started collecting awards and the room grew more excited with each one. Gene Hackman won Best Supporting Actor and thanked Clint from the stage. This man gave me freedom. He let me find the character. He showed me how directing should be done, he said. Joel Cox won Best Film Editing, and he also talked about Clint. Working with Clint is a privilege because the man knows exactly what he wants, he said. With each award announced, the room applauded and looked at Clint, as if everyone was thinking the same thing. Tonight is your night, Clint. Tonight you'll finally get what you deserve. Then the Best Director category came up, and when the presenter walked onto stage to open the envelope, the room held its breath. 3,000 people went silent simultaneously. The presenter slowly opened the envelope, pulled out the card, looked at it for a moment, and then smiled. And the Oscar goes to Clint Eastwood for Unforgiven. The room erupted. 3,000 people rose to their feet simultaneously, and applause lasted for minutes, showing no sign of stopping. People were shouting, whistling, stomping their feet. Steven Spielberg was on his feet applauding. Jack Nicholson was making cigar gestures. Gene Hackman was wiping his eyes because his friend had finally gotten what he deserved. Clint got up from his seat and with that famous walk of his calmly made his way toward the stage, unhurried, unflustered, as if it were just another day, climbed the stairs, took the award and shook the presenter's hand. The presenter said, "Congratulations, Clint. You really deserve this." And Clint just nodded, then approached the microphone. The room was still standing and applauding, but Clint gestured with his hand for them to sit. A calm gesture, a polite gesture, and everyone sat down. The room went quiet and 3,000 people began waiting because everyone expected a long speech. Oscar speeches are usually long. They last 5 minutes, 10 minutes, sometimes 15 minutes. People read pages of thank you lists. They thank their agencies, their lawyers, their accountants, their managers, everyone. Some cry and give emotional speeches through tears. They start from childhood, tell their struggles, say those who didn't believe in me were wrong. Some deliver political messages and use the platform for their own agendas. They speak out against war, talk about climate change, address presidents. Some talk about their own genius and say, I achieved this, I believed in this film, I saw this vision. They give ego-filled speeches. That night, too, there had been other speeches. One actor had spent 8 minutes talking about his own journey, how he went from waiting tables to the Oscars, how many doors had been shut in his face, ending with, "But I never gave up." One producer had read a thank you list for 12 minutes, naming names, studio heads, investors, marketing teams, everyone. The orchestra had started playing, but he kept reading. One director had given a political manifesto for 6 minutes, criticized the president of the time. The room had been divided. Some had applauded while others booed. Everyone expected Clint to speak at length too, because there was a 40-year career, a first Oscar, responses to give to critics, an answer to, how do you feel about those who called you an embarrassment? There had to be a lot to say. Clint stepped up to the microphone, held the award, looked at the audience and began speaking. "This is a very special film for me," he said, his voice calm and confident. "But this award isn't mine." The room went completely silent. 3,000 people held their breath. This was an unexpected opening. "This award belongs to the crew members who got up at 5 a.m. every morning, the lighting technicians who wait for hours to capture the perfect moment, the camera operators who squint to check every detail, the makeup artists who start before dawn and don't stop until shooting ends." Clint's voice was calm and every word was clear and deliberate. The room was completely silent now. No one was moving. No one was whispering. Everyone was listening. The people who build the sets, who hammer nails and carry lumber and sweat for hours. But when the film is finished, nobody knows their names. The people who sew the costumes, who make every button and every stitch perfect, but nobody ever thanks them. The people who feed 200 people every day without complaining, who nobody notices but everybody needs. Clint paused and took a breath, looked at the audience. Without them, I'm just a man standing on an empty set. I can't do anything, can't make any film, can't tell any story. This award is theirs. Then he continued, but shorter now. I thank my producer David Valdez for believing in me, my writer David Webb Peoples for this incredible story, Warner Brothers for giving this film a chance. And finally my family, he said, and Clint's voice softened for a moment. A sparkle appeared in his eyes. They mean more than anything because these awards will gather dust someday. They'll sit on a shelf and nobody will look at them, but family lasts forever. Clint raised the award, said thank you, and walked off the stage. 30 seconds, maybe 35. That was it. He didn't say anything else, didn't respond to critics, didn't talk about his 40-year career, didn't tell his struggles, just said thank you and left. The room was silent for a moment because they were shocked, genuinely shocked. This was unprecedented in Oscar history. Then the applause started, but this was different applause. This wasn't obligatory applause. This wasn't protocol applause. This was real applause, heartfelt applause. People were looking at each other, and there was something in their eyes. Some were smiling, but with a thoughtful smile. Some were nodding as if they'd understood something. And some, yes, some were looking down in shame. Because they'd understood what had just happened. After 10-minute ego-filled speeches, Clint had said everything in 30 seconds. And he'd made them look small. He hadn't done it intentionally, but that was the result. He hadn't talked about sponsors, agencies, lawyers, his own genius. He hadn't taken shots at anyone, hadn't taken revenge, hadn't responded to critics. He'd only thanked the working people, the nameless heroes, and he'd said his family was more important than awards. On Hollywood's most ego-driven night, he'd given the least ego-driven speech. Steven Spielberg was sitting in the front row and nodded. Years later in an interview, he would say, "That night Clint taught us a lesson in 30 seconds, and we were all ashamed. Myself included. I went home that night and thought about my own speeches, realized they were too long, too ego-filled." Jack Nicholson approached Clint backstage that night, shook his hand and said, "How did you do that? Give the best Oscar speech ever in 30 seconds? I've won 3 Oscars and never been that effective." Clint shrugged. "What else was there to say, Jack? I thanked the people. That's what happened," he said. Gene Hackman had won 2 Oscars himself that night and turned to Clint. "I've worked with you for 40 years, Clint, and you still surprise me. I thought I knew you, but I learned something every time," he said. That night, reporters cornered Clint. "Why did you speak so briefly? You waited 40 years. Didn't you want to savor your moment?" they asked. Clint's answer was simple. Because everyone wants to go home and because the most important things are said with the fewest words, speaking long doesn't make you important. Another reporter said, "You didn't mention your 40-year career, your struggles, your rejections. You didn't respond to your critics. Don't you regret it?" Clint laughed, that slight laugh. "Nobody came here to hear my story. I'm just a director. I make films. The real heroes are the people who work every day and never get applause. Without them, none of us would be here. Why would I talk about myself?" "What about the critics?" the reporter asked. "They called you an embarrassment to cinema. They said you have no business directing. They belittled you for years. Won't you respond to them? Did you miss your chance?" Clint thought for a moment and then looked at the reporter with that famous Eastwood stare. "I just did," he said. "I'm holding 2 Oscars. What else do I need to say? Words are cheap. Work speaks." That night, something changed in Hollywood. Everyone was talking about Clint's speech. They were saying 30 seconds, just 30 seconds, and he said more than all of us. Backstage actors were looking at each other. "What are we doing? We spend 10 minutes thanking our agencies. Clint went out and thanked his crew. He embarrassed us, they said. But actually, Clint hadn't embarrassed anyone. He'd just done the right thing. In the following days, newspapers analyzed Clint's speech. They wrote the shortest and most effective speech in Oscar history. They wrote Eastwood taught Hollywood how to speak. In the following years, Oscar speeches were still long. People still displayed their egos and still talked about themselves. Old habits die hard. But Clint's 30 seconds remained a benchmark. People started comparing. They said, that speech was 8 minutes. Clint's was 30 seconds. They said, that guy talked too much about himself. Clint only thanked his crew. They said, that woman thanked her agency. Clint said his family was more important than awards. A term started circulating in Hollywood. They called it the Eastwood Standard. Short, concise, humble, no ego, no showing off, real, and everyone tried to reach this standard, but very few succeeded. 12 years later, in 2005, Clint won another Oscar for Million Dollar Baby, Best Director again. He was 74 years old now, and everyone wondered what he would do this time. Maybe he'll speak longer this time, they thought. Maybe now he has things to tell, they hoped. Clint walked onto the stage, approached the microphone, and again spoke for less than 30 seconds. Same thing. Thanked his crew, thanked his family, walked off. Nothing had changed. The room was surprised again, but this time it was a different kind of surprise. This time it was respectful surprise. This man really doesn't change. This man really is consistent, they thought. No ego. There wasn't any 12 years ago. There wasn't any now. This was Clint Eastwood, a man who never changed, who didn't follow fashion, who didn't bow to pressure, who walked his own path. In an interview, they asked, why are your Oscar speeches always so short? Is this a conscious choice? And Clint's answer was characteristic. Long speeches are usually empty speeches. If they were truly grateful, they'd show it, not say it. Thanking people for 10 minutes isn't really thanking. Speaking from the heart for 30 seconds, that's real gratitude. And to be honest, people want to go home. You have to show them respect. Today, the 1993 Oscar speech is still held up as an example in How to Give an Oscar Speech articles, in Best Oscar Speeches Ever lists. Clint is always there. Always those 30 seconds. 30 years have passed, but it's still talked about. It's taught in film schools, analyzed in communication classes, shown in leadership seminars. They say less, mean more. Like Eastwood, they say let work speak, not ego. 30 seconds, but it made history because humility is always stronger than ego. And true greatness is being able to make yourself small, being able to shine the light on others, being able to share the stage. That night, Clint didn't just receive an award, he gave a lesson in 30 seconds, and Hollywood never forgot that lesson. Maybe it didn't fully apply it, but it never forgot. And every Oscar night, during every long speech, someone always whispers, Clint said this in 30 seconds. If this story of humility moved you, subscribe and share it, because true greatness isn't standing in the spotlight, it's being able to step back. Have you ever heard a short but unforgettable speech? Share your story in the comments.